Good morning, 4th grade. Today we're going to continue reading in our novel, James and the Giant Peach. Before we get started, you have a quick write. It says, how has James changed since the beginning of the novel? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. Our focus question for today is, how has James changed over the course of the novel? Our vocabulary words are procession, and that's when people get into a parade and they walk in a line down the street. The next is monument, and that is a state, or it's when the government wants to honor like a famous person, and so they build a statue or a monument. And then the last one is gossip, and that is when people talk about other people and they're not really sure if what they're saying is true. All right, turn the page and we're going to use our CSPS strategy as we're reading chapter 38 and 39. I'm at 5 minutes later on page 122. 5 minutes later, they were all safely down, and James was excitedly telling his story to a group of flabbergasted officials. And suddenly, everyone who had come over on the Peach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of City Hall, where the mayor of New York made a speech of welcome. And while he was doing this, 100 steepjacks, armed in ropes and ladders and pulleys, swarmed up the top of the Empire State Building and lifted the giant peach off the spike and lowered it to the ground. Then the mayor shouted, "We must have a ticker-tape parade for our wonderful visitors." And a procession was formed, and in the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and his friends. Next came the Peach itself. Men with cranes and hooks had quickly hoisted it onto a very large truck, and there it now sat, looking such as huge and proud and brave as ever. There was, of course, a bit of a hole in the bottom of it where the spike of the Empire State Building had gone in, but who cared about that, or indeed about the peach juice that was dripping out of it onto the street? Behind the Peach, about all over the place in the peach juice, came the mayor's limousine, and behind the mayor's limousine came about 20 other limousines carrying all the important people of the city. And the crowds went wild with excitement. We'll stop right there because we have information about our characters and setting. In box 1A, you would write, the city of New York held a parade for James and the insects who traveled on the Peach. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, we would write down this quote on page 122. And so a procession was formed, and in the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and all his friends. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the setting. And for the setting, it tells us in the second paragraph, we could write, Mayor of New York welcomed everyone who came over on the Peach in a speech at City Hall. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. It says, and suddenly, everyone who had come over on the Peach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of City Hall, where the mayor of New York made a speech of welcome. Press pause to write down the quote and play when you're ready to keep reading. We're at the bottom of page 122. And the crowds went wild with excitement. They leaned out of the windows of the skyscrapers, cheering and yelling and screaming and clapping and throwing bits of white paper and ticker tape, and James and his friends stood up in their car and waved back at them as they went by. Then a rather curious thing happened. The procession was moving slowly along Fifth Avenue when suddenly a little girl in a red dress ran out from the crowd and shouted, "Oh, James, James, Could I please have a tiny taste of your marvelous peach?" "Help yourself," James shouted back. "Eat all you want. It won't keep forever anyway." No sooner had he said this than about 50 other children exploded out of the crowd and came running onto the street. "Can we have some too?" they cried. "Of course you can. Everyone can have some." The children jumped onto the truck and swarmed like ants all over the giant peach, eating and eating to their heart's content. And as the news of what was happening spread quickly from street to street, more and more boys and girls came running from all directions to join the feast. So there was a trail of children a mile long, chasing after the peach as it proceeded slowly up Fifth Avenue. Really, it was a fantastic sight. To some people it looked as though the Pied Piper of Hamelin had suddenly descended upon New York. And to James, who had never dreamed that there could be so many children as this in the world, it was the most marvelous thing that had ever happened. By the time the procession was over, the whole gigantic fruit had been completely eaten up, and the only big brown stone in the middle, licked clean and shiny by 10,000 eager little tongues, still left standing on the trunk. We'll stop right there because we have information about our problem and solution. In box 3A, you would write, "A little girl wanted to know if she could have some of the peach." Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, you can write down what the little girl said at the top of page 123. "Could I please have just a tiny taste of your marvelous peach?" Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the solution. And in box 4A, we can write, "James shares the peach, and boys and girls come running from everywhere to try it." Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. Before the quote, we'll write what James says. "Of course you can," James answered. "Everyone can have some." Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. The paragraph says, "What lesson has James learned through his journey with the insects? How do you know?" And if we go to the bottom of page 123, it talks about how all of the children are coming from all over to taste the peach, and this is something that James never thought would happen, right? And because he was willing to share his peach, he now has all of these children that he can play with.